We've come to this place in the world where all of these men are looking around and feeling attacked.
We don't read anymore. It's making this intentional effort to be a student of life, because you just never know where there's going to be something that is transformative. There's not a better way for you to go soar with eagles than to insert yourself with them by virtue of mentor relationships. I think that's one of the greatest gifts God gave us.
I'm going to listen to the things that God's teaching me as I'm going through. I'm going to write them down. Welcome back to the MakeReady Podcast. My name is Brian Sims, and today I get to talk to Klint Guerry. Klint Guerry was actually my first boss. He is a group vice president with Sewell Automotive Companies. He's now an author. He wrote A Guide to Self-Disruption, which we'll talk a lot about in this podcast. He's also very involved in his church, his community, and all kinds of ministries. So without further ado, here's my good friend, Klint Guerry. Klint Guerry.
Hi, Brian.
Did you know that you were my first boss when I moved to Dallas?
Well, you reminded me of this. Clearly, I wasn't that good because you're doing something totally different.
I think you fired me. No. You laid me off.
This is really a rotten
Yeah,
way
this
to
is
get
how
started.
this is how we're starting.
But was it done with dignity?
It was done with the most dignity you can possibly imagine. I felt so loved through the process. I stayed with the company. It was circumstantial. I would just happen to be very poor with the vocation I had chosen.
Hey, but think about how it actually worked perfectly for, the Lord's plan for you.
Oh.
I mean, you could have still been there, toiling in the soil miserably. Instead, you've done all this amazing work, and you really got to explore your talents.
And I never would have been there.
No. Actually, you're welcome.
Well, I need to put a star just right on your,
You're welcome.
There you go. I was talking to somebody about that the other day, of how God has these little pivot points in life that we don't even notice when they're happening. This goes all the way back to, I was telling you about Coach Randy Allen, how he was I lived in their back house. That was the first place I lived when I moved to Dallas. The legend, Coach Allen. And I knew him because he was my dad's first coach when he was in high school.
How amazing.
It was Randy's first post, and Randy was really involved with FCA. You're familiar with FCA. And they had a camp coming up, and somebody dropped out, and my dad was not a believer, and he's like, Randy Sims, why don't you come to camp? And that was where my dad met the Lord.
How amazing.
That little pivot,
yeah.
Like, how does that ripple through the rest of your life?
Pretty sure he has a plan in all of that.
Oh, absolutely. I think there's a word for that.
So I think the bigger, more important question about Randy Allen is, when he sat in this chair and did the podcast, was he wearing a fedora?
He was not wearing a fedora.
Gosh, that's very disappointing.
I know. Actually. We'll just have to do it again.
You might have to reshoot the whole thing.
We'll have to do it again. We did one where he went down. He didn't when we did the other time too. So we went and filmed him down in the sanctum really? And what's the field called down in Highland Park? Highlander Stadium. I think isn't it like Allen Field now or something? Didn't they name it?
Oh, maybe. I think that's right.
Yeah.
If I was a better fan, I would know the answer to that.
Klint, author. You're an author now.
It's very strange. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, is it one of those things when somebody says your name and you think they're talking to somebody else, and you're like, oh wait, they're talking to me?
I mean, it is a little weird. I think I told you about, so Mark Davis, we're at Park Cities Presbyterian Church, and so Mark's a great friend and mentor, and when the book first came out and we were talking about this, and I and I'm not saying this to sound like overly humble, but it's going to sound that way, but I can't I have a really hard time taking positive feedback. So my immediate defense mechanism is to deflect with some self-deprecating humor. So my normal line is, oh my gosh, my wife says it's fantastic for curing insomnia. And so I was telling Mark Davis this. I said, I just really struggle with this. And he said, well, I'm going to give you some advice. He said, a friend of mine, I used to do the exact same thing. A friend of mine, he stopped me one day and he said, I want you to practice in front of the mirror this one sentence every time somebody gives you a compliment like this, like, hey, I read your book, I think it's great, or this is amazing. I can't believe you did this. Whatever the case may be, is that you just look them in the eye and you say this sentence, are you ready? And I got on the edge of my seat. Yes, I'm ready, Mark. Give it to me. This incredible wisdom. And he said, thank you. And that's it. That's all you need to say.
Light bulb moment.
Stop with all this deflecting business.
So I can just say, hey, Klint, and you just say, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Brian.
Well,
no, real labor of love. Took me 12 years. So, at this pace, probably not going to have a whole lot of, a whole lot more to add to the catalog, but one was a pretty good endeavor for me.
When I read it, because we've had this conversation many, many times, especially when I was working for you, you've had this process of daily note-taking and assessments of things that you're learning and self-development that goes not only, into your life and your work life, but also, your marriage and with your spiritual life. Like, it's just this whole encompassing way of developing yourself into the man that God's called you to be. And it has... When I was reading it, I was like, golly, this parallels almost perfectly with what we're wanting to do with MakeReady, is to address this problem we see of all these men not being prepared. We've come to this place in the world where all of these men are looking around and feeling attacked, and they have no idea how to respond with truth and grace. And you were one of the first people I thought of when I think of a prepared person that has done the work, been diligent, and been disciplined to say, I'm going to listen to the things that God's teaching me as I'm going through. I'm going to write them down.
I think you're giving me too much credit.
I know. I should just let you tell me the process.
I appreciate that. No, I think
thank you.
One of the
thank you. That's what you're supposed to say.
Thank you very much, Brian. But I will say, I wrote that book for me, selfishly. And then if anybody else gets a benefit from it, that's just a cherry on top, because while I may have the trappings of success in many ways, I'm wearing a bow tie. I don't know where this is a podcast, but and I shined my shoes this morning. The trappings of success, I still feel just as lost and broken from day to day as I probably did when I was a 16-year-old. I've definitely come a long way. And thinking in terms of disciplines and preparedness, and God really threw a lightning bolt at me when it comes to what ultimately became the book, because I just had no preparedness. I grew up in a broken family. You know all this stuff already, so I won't bore you with the details. But grew up in a broken family. I really had no, I had mad street skills, but I really had no meaningful developed life skills just to be a normal functioning adult with opportunities, and the Lord had certainly blessed me in many ways with some talents. I've never met a stranger. I love to talk to people. I was always good at making money. That was never really a challenge, but I just didn't have any of the normal disciplines that would have come from a traditional father-son relationship, or mentor-mentee type relationship. And so I was just winging it, and all that came to a head. I was in my early 20s, and really it was two things. It was my job and my now wife. I found I was led to a career, which is where we met. I was led into into an opportunity with a company where I was just flourishing. Just the natural abilities were suited so well to be inside of this environment, at least to some extent. And then I also had met this young lady who I really adored and wanted to marry, and thought she was just amazing, and she still is. But I couldn't bear the thought. All this came together in this, in 2004, where I had this amazing career opportunity ahead of me, but I also clearly recognized that I had an enormous amount of deficiencies. I was living on my talents, basically, as opposed to having a really structured system of really managing life and being responsible and taking full advantage of the things that were coming my way. And then secondarily to that is I had this young lady who grew up truly the polar opposite. Bookends. She grew up in the Leave It to Beaver type family of, really stable home, amazing mother and father, church every Sunday, church every Wednesday, rooted in faith, praying at the dinner table,
Memorizing scripture.
I mean, my wife was, contributing to her full amount to her IRA by the time she was 20 years old. I didn't even know what an IRA was. Yeah. I thought it was a guy named Ira. Just total opposite. And I loved her and she loved me, and I really wanted to ask her to marry me, but I definitely had an incredible amount of insecurity associated with bringing her into my chaos. It scared me. Like I just didn't feel like I was enough for her. I mean, she would actually probably, I was going to say she would disagree. She might agree actually, but I just didn't feel like I was enough. Like I wasn't her dad. Maybe a better way to put it, who's this just rock of stability. And so all this came together in this moment. I've got this really wonderful job where I'm flourishing, and it really, it was the best kind of job, best kind of work where your natural abilities really lend itself to success. I guess that's what most people are looking for in any, in any phase of life. And so I had found that, and then I'd found this amazing young lady, but I certainly felt like I wasn't maximizing these opportunities. And so long story short is I had this just, I'll say it again, this lightning bolt moment one morning where I wanted to change. I wanted to build this disciplined system in my life. And it wasn't like, I wasn't dreaming about writing some book and having a system. It was, not nearly that sophisticated. But my wife, now wife, Natalie, had given me a notebook, just a blank notebook. This really cool looking thing that she bought is like an extra stocking stuffer. When I'm assuming that I'm not alone in this, that you go through at Christmas and pick out random stuff to try to fill up the,
yeah.
You get the one
things that
gift.
Take the most space, and a notebook kind of curls so it fills it out a little bit
and
more.
She said, I thought you would like this because it looks like you. It looks old. I've always looked old, and I like old things. And so I had it I hadn't touched it, and I had it sitting in my closet. And this day that I decided that I was embarking upon this incredible life shift with no plan, I thought, gosh, you know what? I need something to write in. I need a journal. I need a notebook. And so I picked that thing up and I went to work. And that was the beginning of what, I really, not to oversell this, but like transformed my life was that day. It was May the 31st, 2004. And I think it's also pretty cool that I can put a date to it, But
I love it.
But that day, and I'm just talking here, but I got to work. I took this notebook. I sat down at my desk, and the very first thing I did is I spent about 15 or 20 minutes, and I just started writing, journaling. And what I was writing about was like this journey that I was embarking upon, what I was hoping to accomplish, what I was hoping to change, who I was hoping to be or transform into, and the behaviors and things that I was wanting to inspire in myself, which was a lot more of just duty and responsibility and remembering to do things and being accountable and
it's kind of more broader.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very broad outline of what I was trying to accomplish. I spent about 15 or 20 minutes or so writing about this, and then I just launched into the day, and I carried this notebook around with me throughout the day, and I just started writing down my to-do list. As things would come at me, I would add it to my to-do list, and I would find myself in meetings, and I would just feverishly take notes, and also felt like I have never been diagnosed with ADHD, but I'm pretty sure I would be like the poster child for ADHD. And so what I also found that was kind of interesting is that as I was taking this little notebook around with me and I was taking notes, it forced me to really pay attention and forced me to, kind of focus on the person that I was that was presenting, et cetera. And so then day 2 comes. This worked yesterday, so I started the day. I journaled. I started a new page, and I spent a few minutes writing about what yesterday was great, and here were the things that I learned yesterday, and then kind of moved into the second day, and then I carried over my to-do list, the things I hadn't gotten accomplished from the previous day, and same thing goes, taking notes, and this just continues. I finished the notebook that I had 67 pages, and so when I finished 67 pages, I was really proud of my accomplishment, mainly that I just stuck with a discipline, but I'd also really started to see some tangible benefits of just getting back to people and responding and being more thoughtful about and intentional how I was spending my time. And by then I'd kind of morphed into understanding that when I had a list of to-dos, I would start to think about how I was prioritizing those things. And the way I did it in my mind was I would do things, anything on my list as I was looking forward to how I was going to spend my day was I would do things for others first. And then anything that anybody was waiting on for me, I would take care of first. I would immediately solve those things. And then anything that was related to work broad, kind of ... anything related to work more broadly. And then the last thing was anything that I needed to do for myself. And I was adding on to this list of to-dos all of life. So if my now wife, Natalie, if she said, hey, don't forget to, that would go on my list. And then that would fall in the category of things that I needed to do for someone else. And so it started to have this like wonderful cumulative benefit, kind of holistically, that I was serving better the people that I was working with. I was serving better my customers. I was serving my, then girlfriend, better fiance, better. And I started to just see this build, this kind of over time of where I was, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy a little bit.
Yeah.
I didn't see myself as being someone who would be counted as a responsible, dependable, accountable person. But then when I started to get this, kind of the reciprocity of people saying, recognizing my responsibility and my accountability and things, it's like fuels the fire, So last thing I'll say, and then you can ask me another question or else we'll be here for 2 days, which is that little process I started that day, May the 31st of 2004. Other than when I finished that first notebook and I decided I needed to go back and like memorialize this in some way. So I reread it and I made a table of contents in the front cover, and then in the back, I had gotten all these amazing lessons that I had learned over that 67-page notebook that I notated the really special ones in the back. I called them my most important lessons learned. I put them in the back. There's nothing about the process that I have ever changed. Like it was given to me that day in 2004. I have executed that faithfully now for 21 years almost. And it really transformed my life in a myriad of ways that we could talk about for 2 days. But
what was the first thing you wrote down? Do you remember?
Oh gosh, that's a really good question that I would love to know the answer to. But it would really be, and I'll have to get back to you on that. But really, it was in that broad spectrum of defining what I was trying to accomplish.
Because this reminds me, growing up, my mom had a prayer journal, has a prayer journal. I mean, she's written down every prayer she's prayed for 30 years, and something will happen in life, and she'll just be like, she'll go back to her notes, and she'll find it, and she checks it off, and so she has thousands of these that are just checked off prayers.
Incredible.
And it's just nuts.
Well,
I mean,
I can relate to that.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I in this digital age, I mean, I like technology. I think technology is awesome. I mean, how could you be a human and not enjoy technology to some extent? But I love the power of writing. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I have definitely found by virtue of this habit, over the last 2 decades, is that by physically writing things down, and certainly the act of repetition. So in my little process, there's a lot of repetition, a lot of repetitive writing. It's just kind of like rewriting your to-do lists every single day if there's things that you haven't checked off. But there's a method for that, But what it has done is organize my mind based upon days of the week and calendar days and years. So I can relate to your mother because I can think sometimes, gosh, by virtue of my employer over all of these years, I've taken many classes at Harvard, University of Virginia, all these just amazing learning institutions, and I can sometimes think, gosh, I really would like to go back to that class, and I can go just nail the notebook, same kind of thing. Because I can think, well, gosh, that was around 2014, and that was in June, I think, and I can just go.
You got this timeline in your head. Just you see it. What's the mind map people do with like people's names in memory? The memory palaces.
Oh yes.
And so yours just is contained in these notebooks.
In the notebooks, yeah.
In a way, that's fascinating.
Absolutely.
How does it change the way you think about things, in terms of, all right, do I write this down or not?
I write everything down.
Everything.
I mean, almost like a little bit. It may be like a clinical. How much I write
So
down.
how many pages do you go through in a day? What's a typical day?
Oh man, anywhere from 1
Okay.
to embarrassingly, like if I'm in a meeting or something, like a really important meeting, and again back to this undiagnosed ADHD workaround that I've developed here for myself. I mean, shoot, sometimes I could write like 12, 15 pages of notes. I mean, just every detail. I don't know what I like. If you've ever, did you ever do the Strengths Finder, Clifton Strengths Finder?
I did.
So one of my strengths is input, which is about collecting things and information, and I see that in my notebooks because I really like to collect everything so that then later I can find the most important parts out of what it was that I was experiencing. And I just, by virtue of this habit over all these years, I've also discovered how much you can learn from the most unlikely of places. I do a little weekly, I take a most important lessons learned and put it on LinkedIn. And I write a...
I see those. Yeah. The cards. You have them all written on cards. Oh, I love those.
And so like...
Smokey John's
Smokey John was one I was just going to tell you about.
Yep.
You know, like that was, gosh, I don't even know what year that was. That might have been like in 2003 or 4 or something that I was... No, it had to have been later than that.
You took me to Smokey John's
Did
one
I
day.
really
You
take
did.
to
We went
Smokey
to the Bible study. Does he still do that?
Smokey passed away.
Oh,
he passed away in 2019.
He was doing that for a long time and just had...
Yeah, but you know what? That's my point. Is like sitting in that room, I was taking notes in my notebook, and he said, "Do your giving while you're living, so you're knowing where it's going."
And you're like, "Oh, where's my..."
Well, but I mean, I think that's the point. In many ways, is that my notebooks for me have turned me into a little bit of a student of life. You know, at all times, with all people, in all settings. Because you just never know. I mean, it's sitting right over there behind you on the couch, my notebook, because you just never know where there's going to be something that is transformative, you know, like life shaping. And that's a great example. You know,
well, that's my goal, to think of profound things that end up in your notebook. I don't know
when we go back and rewatch this later, then I bet there's going to be some doozies.
How has that changed the way your kind of view of discipleship, of how, so that's for you and how you disciple yourself and kind of the input method of that. Mm-hmm. How does that reflect in how you disciple other men in particular?
Gosh, that's a great question. I think first and foremost is back to what I just stated, which is be a student of all people. You know, I mean, certainly as I get older and I turn into the old gray face here, which if you can't see me, my beard is totally white.
There's a few more gray hairs than when I met you originally.
It's totally white. But I don't feel any older on the inside than I did when I was probably about 16 or 17 years old.
You just added wisdom. It's
just all that wisdom.
Yeah.
And so I love humans, you know, and all of our broken messiness. And I love how there's something to be gained and grown from everyone, and vice versa. You know, we just have so much to be able to share with each other and to lift each other up and to pour into each other, and whether it be through a word of encouragement or whether it be from a most important lessons learned, you know, from your own life. So I think, you know, as we think about that relative to me taking notes and that kind of thing, I mean, I've certainly, you know, really enjoyed sharing, not prescriptively, like everybody needs to do exactly what I do, because I think that's, you know, a little bit personal. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, the great lesson of all of us needing a methodology of our own, but B is really appreciating how wonderful you are, you know, like how wonderful you are, Brian.
Uniquely created.
And how much you have to give and to share for somebody or somebodies.
Well, gosh, thank you, Clint. I appreciate
you do.
it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm so proud of you and proud of everything that you've accomplished and done. Yeah. No, I think
my wife tells me every day.
I think you're pretty rad. But I think that, I mean, just in sharing and being willing to share, I've certainly enjoyed using the process in the book now to use for mentorship and menteeship. That's one of my favorite things. I think that's one of the greatest gifts God gave us. You know, the iron sharpens iron, but is the gift of mentorship. And I felt like there was a void, a void as somebody who has been mentored by so many incredible people and still am, over the last 2 decades, but is also how many people I've had in my work life, particularly to be a mentor for. And there's a void there because oftentimes like if you get paired up, certainly if it's assigned, it's
Right.
always a little awkward just to begin with. But then even if you want, like I would love for all young men, particularly to really reach high and to have mentors and to have, men in their lives that they can, go sit and learn from in all aspects, whether it be, career or financial advice or marital advice or parenting advice, all these things, which are just so critical, all the seasons of life. But it's a little bit of an awkward experience to go sit down at lunch and it's kind of like,
Well, it's awkward for the person asking, and then for the person being asked, it's almost like,
Totally.
Well, wait a minute, I'm not Superman. Like, I don't have a lot to share.
yeah. And then it just kind of turns into an interview as opposed to a dialogue. And so that is one of the main purposes of a guide to self-disruption is to give an actual tool that you can use in a mentor-mentee relationship. Because each chapter, the first section is really just about having a process. That's the first section of it. The rest of it is 5 principles, and those 5 principles are very small. They're easier to digest, but at the back of each principle is a list of prompts, questions that are thought-provoking, and they can certainly be done on your own, but they work beautifully in this type of mentor-mentee type scenario. And so that's just another way that I think, that this has all benefited discipleship from my point of view.
I love it. It's so encouraging to hear that because, again, back to what our kind of thesis for Make Ready is that there's a breakdown between mentors and mentees, older men, younger men, disciples, discipled, because of this social media, internet age to where men have isolated and they work from home. They don't spend time around each other, and me and Scott have really realized like we've benefited from so many discipleship relationships and didn't even know they were happening. They didn't have to be formal. It's just you build the muscle of doing the awkward thing of asking the questions and putting yourself in the way of other wise men, even men that don't even know that they're wise. They're just living life. And it just doesn't happen as much anymore.
Right.
How do you encourage those relationships? What should men do to foster those?
Well, first thing, I not to sound like I'm just trying to sell books and notebooks, but really is if I could have one thing happen particularly for young men, if I just think about it in that sense, it's making this intentional effort to be a student of life. And whatever form that takes. But, for me, writing everything down and being very intentional about having a system and having notebooks that I treasure, those have become some of my most valued possessions are my notebooks going back all these years. And certainly as they've gone through seasons of life with me is, like I lost my father during that time and writing about that and the births of all of my children and so going through all of those, life's ups and downs, but so there's an intentionality there. There's a level of importance that's given to, I owe it not only to myself to capture the narrative of my life, but I actually owe it also to future generations of my family, owe it to my children and my children's children. My wife thinks this is all kind of ridiculous, but I do think that like my grandkids will really, I don't know about my kids. My kids know me too well. They won't really enjoy necessarily reading dad's old notebooks, but my grandkids, I think there's hope. And certainly great grandkids would be amazing. But I think that's one. It's like just treating life, and I'm not saying take yourself too seriously.
No,
but I'm saying just the gift that God gave you of life. I mean, you were uniquely created. You were on His lips when He hung on the cross. Like you are really amazing and special. And there's I think a little bit of a responsibility to, treat life in that vein. So that would be one. It's like an intentionality. And then 2 is really just having the courage to do it. It's understanding its level of importance, but also having the courage to do it. And this is a gift of many gifts I've been given by Carl Sewell. The great Carl Sewell, the legend, the automotive giant that he is. But Carl has always inspired having mentors for everybody and for himself, even as, Carl's in his early 80s now, and I'm quite certain he still has probably some great mentors. I mean, they don't have to be older than you, which I think is a little bit of a misnomer about mentor relationships, but he's always inspired not only having mentors, but is like really stretching yourself, aiming high, like going after and like really pursuing people who are really special that you feel like are a little bit aspirational. Like, this is somebody that's so far down the road of where I would like to be, and I want to build a relationship with them. And it's another quote from a good friend, Dudley Harrelson. He said, "It's hard to soar with the eagles when you're flying with the turkeys." And
another one of my bosses, by the way.
Yes, Dudley, amazing guy who's retired. But Dud, what a wonderful way to think about mentorship. Mm-hmm. It's like there's probably not a better way for you to go soar with eagles than to insert yourself with them by virtue of mentor relationships. And so have the courage to go ask them. And then the third piece is you need to have a plan. And so that's where, again, shameless plug, but like having like the book or using something like a guide to self-disruption that encourages these questions to go in and say, I really want this relationship with you. If you would be willing to spend this time with me, and if it's not too much trouble, let's get together once a month or once every 90 days, and I will have answered these questions, and maybe we can discuss, and you can help guide me in these points of my life.
What are characteristics that men should look for in a mentor?
Well, I think obviously they need to be shared values above all things. But I do think that you can have buckets, and I think buckets are really important. I mean, having somebody who is really a career mentor might be wildly different than somebody who's your spiritual mentor. If you could ever get lucky enough to find somebody that was all wrapped up into one, that would be amazing. But really, I think it's having 2 or 3 or 4 mentor relationships that are a lot more targeted. I mean, I had the virtue of having Dr. Jim Dennison as a mentor, and he really was my spiritual life fam. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better guy than Jim, but he wasn't going to advise me on how to be spectacular in the car business. I understood that.
Yeah. Different muscle. Well, yeah.
But he could also, interestingly enough, he was really great at being an advisor as I was thinking about how to deal with leadership challenges, but also trying to lead in the secular world and be a man who also led, filled with the Spirit of the Lord. And so, he definitely cross-pollinated. But you get my drift. Like, I think it's looking for people who are aspirational inside of individual buckets and really going into it with that intentionality. I think the more intentional you can be about what the outcome of the relationship, the outcome that you hope to get out of the relationship is what would set you up for the most success.
I had a guy tell me, a mentor, I can't remember exactly who it was, but one of the nuggets that he said is that, like, your experiences are not consumables. They're not to consume. They're to steward. Like, they're not yours.
See, if I had my notebook right now, I'd be writing that down.
Since I don't know what to attribute to,
that one a little
he just
bit.
gives me is wisdom I've stolen from other thieves. Yeah.
Right? No, that's well said.
So it's stewardship is a huge aspect of mentorship and discipleship. Because it's not only the victories in life, not only the things that you're excited to write down and remember, it's also the things that were seen by some people's failures or things that you overcame. I know you're a massive student of history, which should surprise nobody.
You had me at hello.
But I have been deep diving into the Sir Ernest Shackleton saga, and it's just been fascinating, which is, by all measures that they set out for, a complete disaster and failure. But that's not at all the lesson from that story. It's about leadership. It's about overcoming. It's about what do you do when you have to pivot, when your goal was not what God intended.
Right.
Taking things like that. I've learned so much.
I think, not to just be belaboring this same point. I mean, it's about being a student.
Mm-hmm.
And I love to read history. And, but I think too, as we kind of marry these two ideals, is, one of the most impactful life lessons that I think I've ever had came from reading A Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin, which is about Lincoln. But there's this story, and I'm going to get this directionally correct, but Edward Bates was also running for the Republican nomination for president, and he ultimately removed himself from the race. But there's a quote in that book whenever he was removing himself that he had kind of had this little bit of an epiphany. I guess it's a big epiphany, quite frankly. But he said, "A man's selfish ambition, if left unchecked, will quietly steal his happiness and his character." And that hit me. It still does hit me because, like so much of our, particularly men, I think, I mean, we're running this race. We're running the race, and we all want to be known, and we all want to be revered in some way, and we all want success, whatever our version of success is. And what Edward Bates was saying is that when our selfish ambitions are left unchecked, they can quietly steal our happiness and our character, which what he was saying is that in an effort to try to pursue these things that are going to make me great or inflate my ego or, be viewed by others as something that I've done well. It's like the old C.S. Lewis scoreboard, that these are the things that can actually steal all the wonderful joys that you have by virtue of spending time with your family. That could, because you're spending so much time at work. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that, but it's the great gut punch of, checking ourselves against what's really important in our lives as opposed to the things that the world tells us that we need to be pursuing. But that I got from a history book. It wasn't like I was reading some, book of Proverbs or something.
To that point, like it's the stewardship of your experiences. Like you never know what you're going to come across. No. And so you always have to have the radar up and seeing life in a certain way,
well said.
Right? And that's a totally different way of looking at life is the difference between a consumeristic look and a stewardship look or outlook.
Yes.
And, I obviously it wasn't a day one, I'm going to write these notebooks and I've got it all figured out. It's going to be just like this. When do you think you really hit like, man, I've done this for a year. This is going to be the rest of my life?
Well, that's a good question too, Brian. I mean, I have never changed anything, as I already stated. So I'm doing the exact same process that I started from the very beginning. Probably about a year, when I finished a full year of notebook. My notebooks take me, based upon the size, anywhere from, a month and a half to 2 months. That's kind of about how long I live inside of a single notebook. And so I finished with a full year, and here I had this, miniature stack of notebooks. And I was so proud of my accomplishment, in many ways, just sticking with the discipline. And I'd also started to see this manifest itself in growth and development, and again, some of the, feedback loop of hearing these things that again I didn't necessarily associate with my character, and so to hear these things kind of connect, like it's just pouring fuel on the fire. But probably about that, finishing that year and then going back, I decided I would go back through and reread my whole year, which doesn't take that long. Like it sounds a little, insurmountable, but it wasn't. But through that process of rereading and relearning and going through these experiences again, I made a master list of most important lessons learned. And it was probably then that I realized, like, this is something that is really transformational, or it was transformational for me. And then again, now, I mean, it just is life. Probably my favorite part about this little system that God imparted upon me was that it's holistic. It's not just a work system. I take that same notebook to church, and in my life is chronological. It's Monday through Sunday, Monday through Sunday, Monday through Sunday. 52 times a year. And everything lives inside of that one notebook, which I think has really helped me in many ways to live out my mission of being a representative for the Lord, because my Sunday rolls into Monday, and I begin each day. Oftentimes my journaling is very prayerful. Not always, but a lot of times it's very prayerful. And I write at the top of every single page, with very few exceptions. I write either SMF or FMS or seek my face and feed my sheep. And I put that on every single page. But I think in many ways that's helped me to, kind of direct myself and direct my focus. And then I like to talk to myself a lot by virtue of writing. When I'm sitting in a meeting, I talk a lot. I mean, I don't want to let the cat out of the bag.
You have a lot of good things to say. So
and so
it's stewardship.
Oftentimes I don't want to just be known as like the guy who dominates a meeting or a conversation. I really want to listen more, and so a lot of times I'll be sitting over there and self-talking through my pen, like, listen, the 2 ears, 1 mouth, buddy.
You ever written anything down? You're like, man, I'm glad I didn't tell somebody that.
I don't know. I mean, I like the whole notion of practice, and I think of like the old Tiger Woods putter. I can't remember the exact, but he would do literally thousands of repetitions with his putter, and then he would like meditate on the thousands of repetitions in his mind, like how everything felt and what it would sound like and how the ball would roll. And I actually like to manifest that in some ways, although clearly not as important as a guy like Tiger Woods, but manifest that self through my writing too. Like when I'm getting ready to go into a meeting or something, I will sit there and prayerfully write about what I'm hoping to accomplish, how I want to be received, the things that I don't want to do or the things that I do. Certainly a lot more positive self-talk than negative. I mean, we generally tend as humans, I don't know, speaking for myself here, to default to the negative self-talk.
Oh, totally.
As opposed to really projecting the positive side.
Well,
of
we
things.
don't. We look at it. We don't give ourselves the freedom to fail.
Yes.
And without the freedom to fail, success has no sweetness to it.
Sure.
And it's how has this changed the way you've looked at fatherhood? Because you have three
kiddos, yeah.
3 kiddos.
10, 15, almost 15 here in a month, and 18-year-old, which is hard to believe.
You have an 18-year-old.
Yeah, he's going to be 18 in about a week.
Yeah.
So it's unbelievable. Well, I use the same principles as I do for work and growing as it relates to being a father. I've made an enormous amount of mistakes, and I try to learn from those. And I like to capture them. I like to write them down so that I can think about how I want to grow from this moment if I've made a mistake, or certainly even the things that we did well. I love to write about my kids in many ways because I don't want to lose it. It's very tangible whenever you write things down. And so I love that the knowledge of having that narrative, in my possession. What an incredible gift that is that God gave me whenever he said, I want you to do this. I want you to start doing this on this day, and May the 31st of 2004, now to think about that. I have those moments captured, and I'm just so grateful that I have that, and will always have that. But I think it's I don't want to just repeat all my same words here, but there's an intentionality associated with learning and growing, and knowing that I'm going to make mistakes, and knowing that I'm going to, have massive amounts of failure and desire for do-overs, but to see a progression of growth and building of wisdom. And I can't wait to hopefully impart and share that with my kids as they go around in those same settings in life. As
you're around a lot of men in work, in church, and raising boys, and are there any aspects of just masculinity today that you think, man, it's missing the mark of like how guys are pursuing, their spouses, how guys are pursuing work. Like there's an error. And if we could correct that, there would be much more blessing to the world through men.
Well, could you ask me a deeper question?
Yeah. Can you? What's the
Brian,
meaning of life?
Gosh, the first thing that is really just on my heart to say is that it breaks my heart in many ways that we, as a society, we don't read anymore. And that's probably too bold of a statement, but
Your grades, read your books. But you're not wrong. You're not wrong. I mean, that's where a lot of these people are like listening to podcasts. Their minds are just exploding because they've never read before. And podcasts is just like sort of the same kind of just information gathering.
Yeah, I mean, I think audiobooks have, done a world of good. I think about the best decisions that I've made one was like learning to write and keep my notebooks. And two was really, it wasn't really my idea, but it was really, again, working for Carl Sewell as you did, where we met. I mean, this guy, expects you to be a learner and really, it's a gentle push, to be investing in your own personal development and education. But gosh, I see so clearly like how that has benefited me, not just, from a secular sense of success in a work environment, but how it's helped to build me and grow me into someone where, I think 2 decades of marriage and 24 years with the same company and having a traditional family unit of a wife that I love and children that I adore and how that translates into the next generation. But I think so much of that of like surviving and navigating those waters has been as a result of this willingness to learn, willingness to not feel like I needed to wing it and have all the answers, but a willingness to go find a book or go have a mentor, go find somebody to help shepherd and steward my life in such a way that it became mutually beneficial. And so I would say one is that. I wish I could just like wave a magic wand and, I try to encourage it as much as I can with our young folks as they come in out of the university. It's like, I'm giving you the, kind of the 3 keys to success, in a real, kind of cliche sense, but it's take an investment in your learning and pursue your own education. And then the mentor piece, truly, because mentors, not only, the obvious piece of them pouring into you, but also I have found that nothing holds you personally to a higher standard of living than having mentees. It is truly mutually beneficial. I mean, it is virtually, I'm not going to say impossible, it's virtually impossible for you to pour into someone else in that capacity and not hold yourself to that same standard.
Well, I think that's one of the greatest misunderstandings of discipleship is that it's one direction. It's not at all one direction. It's both directions. And it's the Great Commission is not, hey, go to seminary, learn all of the answers to every question, and then you'll be prepared to disciple. It's like, no, go do it today, now. Like you have a story to tell. Yes. Go tell it.
Yeah, well said.
How does it work with, I have a very, I benefit from having a lot of very close friends that are my age that we kind of mentor each other, but it's not necessarily somebody who's, ahead of me mentoring me so that I could be more like him when I become older. We're all kind of moving along together, learning things together, kind of this brotherhood deal. Have you do you have that in your life? Is that something that?
I mean, not the way you've described it. I mean, we always had the good friend groups and, good close friends that we've kind of done life with. I think what has benefited me the most, I think, though, is, now I'm getting older. I was going to say I've always really liked old people, but now I guess I'm just like people because now I'm falling right into that same category. But I think it's the breadth. It's the breadth of relationships that I think has the biggest impact. I mean, of course, yes, I love my buddies and we do life together and we, try to support each other and lift each other up and encourage each other. But I really think when I really reflect on what are those really meaningful, big, learning moments or nuggets or, circumstances that were really life shaping, kind of like those most important lessons learned you pull off the top of your head, they generally are not from my immediate buddy group as much as they were from somebody who was further down the road that had lived those experiences and given me some perspective. And certainly now that I've got we've got a long ways to go here, but now that I have a kid that is almost successfully through high school and is about to go to college, which I love my son. He's amazing. That in some ways feels like a minor miracle. Because when you're parenting for the first time, at least from my point of view, like when you're going through the teenage years for the very first time, like it seems like there's no way we're gonna conquer this. But isn't there such reassurance in knowing, oh my goodness, everything really did, we had our bumps and bruises along the way, but I can see so clearly how in his life, God's plan, the things that parents, certainly that we make every effort to try to control and keep him out of making bad decisions. Invariably, they're going to happen, and then you see so clearly how those mistakes, those things, whenever whenever he drove the car off the metaphorical road, actually became those things that you're watching your son, where he's building character and where he's learning from and he's growing into his own young man, and he needs to have his own stories. He needs to have his own experiences of this is what I did to pull myself out of this situation. That's how you develop yourself into someone who can really be effective in again this whole discipleship conversation. He needs to have those things. So now I can appreciate that, as we get to round 2 and round 3, maybe we'll be a little more relaxed and not totally relaxed, but you know what I'm saying? Like we'll have a greater appreciation. And so that's where you see having that down the road mentor that says, okay, buddy, it's, kind of pat you on the shoulder and say, hey, I've seen this movie before.
Well, having done this for 18 years, how did you balance the, you can have parents that are way too strict and parents that give way too much freedom, and that there's somewhere in the middle to where there's freedom to fail, but not to fail to the point of no return. Like, how did you balance that?
I can't wait for my wife to listen to this. As I scratch my head, she says,
would Natalie have the same
question? My head whenever I'm nervous about answering a question.
And Natalie would answer this at the exact same way, wouldn't she? Yes.
I love the creation of, God's creation of us. I mean, it's just so beautifully messy, and I love the fact that when you're a child, you think parents have everything figured out, and then when you're a parent, you figure out that your parents were just guessing most of the time.
Yeah. If my kids turn out, it's going to be despite my inability to parent correctly.
I have recently told my children, my older 2 children, because my 10-year-old is not nearly ready for this conversation, but is, really outside of you choosing Jesus as your Lord and Savior, right on the heels of that decision in your life, the next most important decision is who you choose to marry.
Amen.
And praise the Lord, hallelujah, I made a good choice. When you think about how like you asked that big question about over these 18 years, how we navigated these waters and stuff, it's my wife. She is spectacular. And we really fill each other's voids well, and so she's done an absolutely amazing job of doing all of those things that you just described, of having, really allowing freedom to make mistakes when necessary, certainly with the wisdom imparting conversations of trying to avoid those situations, as parents will try to do, but also applying the appropriate amount of punishment when necessary, to really allow for growth and development. And also, being serious when it's most appropriate. When there needs to be very clear guidelines that go against the grain, either, I didn't realize how much, you think about peer pressure and your kiddos being exposed to peer pressure. I didn't really ever even know that parenting peer pressure was a thing.
Oh, I'm learning about this. It's a thing.
It's a thing.
I mean, that was one of the misnomers of when you're growing up, you look at adults and you're like, oh man, they've got it all figured out.
Oh man. Yeah.
They know all the answers.
Yes.
And then you become an adult and you're like, we're just a bunch of kids.
Yeah. Forever until death,
It's just admitting that you don't have it all together is when you start to.
Yeah. I mean, probably the greatest, in my years thus far of, God's example of saying you have to lay it all at my feet is related to parenting, and I'm not talking about yes, sometimes it feels that way when you're chasing kids in diapers and that kind of stuff. But as kids get older, they make older decisions, and those older decisions can have older consequences, and those things can become very challenging.
Yeah.
Challenging not only for them as you worry about them, but tough on the family, and having no option other than to let go, let God, lay at His feet, prayerfully understand that my child was also created by God. I mean, what a dumb statement that is, but at the same time, like, I think that just being totally vulnerable for me, you spend a lot of time thinking about this as being your creation, and that you have this impossible responsibility of raising this child into a successful adult. It's impossible, I mean, in many ways. And, but the humility and understanding and needing to be humbled and understanding that, you were just a vessel for this creation that God designed, and, that Hollis and Margot and Ryan, my three kiddos, were on the lips of Jesus hanging on that cross just like me, and that He created them for their unique purpose, and that we are a gift, or they are gifted to us to steward their lives. And yes, we have a responsibility to make every effort that we can to raise them in the Lord in the way that we believe that we should, by virtue of, creating a household that is sharing the gospel and right, and going to church on Sunday and creating these. But at the end of the day, we are creating just this foundation that then, the Lord is going to use, and they're going to have to, not to just repeat this point, I mean, they're going to have to have their sinful experiences. But it's those, you and I sitting here talking to each other today, and I feel so humbled and honored even to be considered to sit here and do this. But like, I wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation with you without my sinful experiences of life, and having to turn to the Lord to learn how to deal with those things, to grow and to mature and to be able to impart any kind of wisdom. And, and I'm, just take this one step further, is that, the challenges and difficulties in life on all spectrum, it's so beautiful to see the Lord's work. I mean, it's beautiful to see how He. I mean, I'll give you a nickel story of this is because now in my life as an adult and in work, in career, I am responsible for a whole lot of humans and shepherding their lives. And when we were pregnant with my now soon-to-be 18-year-old, we went on a baby moon, and I had a severe allergic reaction, anaphylaxis reaction to Aleve, I took a leave, and I had taken a leave before, but in that moment I had this horrible reaction. Obviously I was okay. I'm here, I'm sitting with you. But that was the first time in my life that I had ever been confronted with my mortality, because I was sitting there just healthy as I could be. And I did something that was so mundane that I had done plenty of times before. And in this instant, I almost died. And it scared me to death. And there was about a year in there where I dealt with really severe anxiety and panic attacks. Nobody knew. Nobody knew at the office. Nobody knew around me. The only person who really knew was my wife, my doctor. But I would be at the office and I would have these really severe panic attacks and nobody knew. And praise the Lord, I worked through it. I read a lot of books. That really helped. Really prayerfully considered working through the situation, and I was fortunate enough that worked for me over time. And it was miserable, and it was horrible, and I hated that I had to go through all that. It was about a year, okay? Well, that was, 18 years ago. He was in utero. Hollis was in utero, and here he is about to go to college. But the most beautiful thing about that is that, God knew that decades later, I would have a job where I would have, under my little, if you look at my little hierarchy tree there's about 850 people. And I pretty much spend the majority of my days at the office sitting and really counseling and talking to people. And there is not, and I mean, this is not an oversell from a car salesman here, but there's rarely a week that goes by that I don't end up in a conversation with someone who's dealing with anxiety and panic attacks. And it's just like that in the sense that when it comes to even just in the point of discipleship, like I could not, it would not be possible for me to really pour into and support and know how to pray for and know how to love on that human if I hadn't had that awful experience. And to tie a little bow on this is that back to parenting is that as difficult and as painful and as hard as it is for us as parents to watch our kids go through those things, it is critical to, in many ways, it may be critical to them fulfilling whatever it is that God has in store for them.
Well said. Man, what a freeing way to think about it.
It is right now.
Yeah, in the moment.
Yeah,
in hindsight,
the moment, maybe not, but
it's. I mean, by God's grace, like He sometimes gives us the gift of hindsight and to see, all of these things that that He's done and gifted us with along the way to produce what He is using now, maybe in your life, maybe in somebody else's life. I mean, like my mom with her prayer journal. You with the notebook. I mean, that is just stewarding your story,
yes,
in a way that God wants it to be used.
Yes.
And it's you being faithful and having discipline and like just doing it.
Thank you for that. Yeah. I mean, that's why I say it's, one of the greatest possessions I have is having those years of writing. Because it's just like all of those things. I've written about those in the moments and then being able to go back and think about them again and digest those moments again and feel the emotions again. But it is such a wonderful way of building wisdom and growth, personal growth and development. And I don't think you can have one without the other, at least in some form.
I totally agree with that. Klint, is there anything else that, golly, I got to say this. I wrote it down in my book earlier and I got to tell somebody.
Well, I'm so proud of you.
Oh.
I'm so proud of you, and I'm proud of Scott and the whole MakeReady team and what you guys have accomplished.
I just know how to turn cameras on, and that's about it. So
that's not true. I mean, but look at the gifts God's given you and how you're choosing to be faithful with them. And I just pray beyond all things that the Lord will continue to bless and multiply what it is that you're doing through discipleship and trying to provide resources for men. And us men, we need to, not be quite so tough and get out of our comfort zone and build some relationships and be vulnerable and find people to be vulnerable with and to pour into, on both ends of the spectrum, younger, older, bridge those gaps and just be together.
Just a bunch of knuckleheads.
Just a bunch of knuckleheads.
Klint, thank you so much for being with us.
It's my pleasure.
There it is.
Thanks, man. Gosh, that was really fun.
That is fun. Well, if you're up for it, you can be a regular guest on this sucker.
I would love it.
This is fun. I mean, I love